Congressman Wittman, good to have you with us.
John, it's great to be with you this morning. Thanks for the opportunity.
Always. By the way, you're with Barry Moore here at his dealership and Colonel Mike. I want to get right to the Puerto Rican bond restructure, which really, Congressman, last night, this is a bailout. I don't care how they want to term this. I mean, you've got Wall Street that bet on these bonds for Puerto Rico at a high return. They made their bet knowing that if they went down, they'd get bailed out anyway. So it's like if average people do this, they get screwed. But if the Wall Street elites get involved, the government bails them out. And even though it's not tax dollars being used, at the end of the day, nothing is going to change there. They've destroyed their economy through all sorts of bad decisions. And the people that invested in the bonds, I mean, which any time you make an investment with a high margin return, it's a risk, they basically get protected. How is that fair?
Well, John, it's not. There are all kinds of issues with this. First of all, the restructuring here, while folks say it's not Chapter 9, it has all the likeness of Chapter 9. So as they say, if it walks like a duck, swims like a duck, quacks like a duck, it's a duck. My concern is that other states and cities will look at this and say, well, listen, don't call it Chapter 9. Just give us the same thing that you gave to Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
That's one thing. The second thing is that there's nothing in this bill that helps the economy in Puerto Rico. First of all, of the 900,000 workers in Puerto Rico, 300,000 are government workers. They have to restructure their government to make it sustainable. Secondly, they have a tax policy there that is not friendly to businesses. They have to restructure that to make sure that they're attracting businesses. There is a small provision there about providing hub zone designations for businesses to come to Puerto Rico, but that in and of itself is not going to allow them to grow an economy to sustain the amount of debt that they have right now. So, John, you can restructure debt, and you're there with Barry and Colonel Mike, as they know. If you're gonna buy a car and you can't afford the payment, even if you restructure it and you look at trying to make it to where it's affordable, if you don't have the ability to raise revenue, or in that instance have a job, you still can't pay that. That's where Puerto Rico is right now, and people continue to leave Puerto Rico. So if we aren't addressing or helping them address their own economic issues, I don't care how you restructure the debt, they absolutely don't have the wherewithal to pay it back, no matter how it's restructured. So I think that's the fundamental thing here. And folks said, well, what do you do to help them out? What we in Congress do to help them out is to make sure that they have a restructured economy there that'll actually survive and can produce. I think that's the key. And their energy is unaffordable. They have very, very high energy costs. There are things we could do to help them restructure how the cost of energy is projected there, so that business can actually get affordable energy, so they can do business and compete against others. So, John, at every turn, whether it's the structure of how the debt will be redone, or what they're doing to rebuild an economy there, none of those things are happening in a way that prepare them for long-term prosperity. And you see what's happened in other situations. I think that this should have gone through the courts. Now, yes, it would be very difficult. It would be disruptive for a while. But look at what Argentina went through. I mean, they went through a similar type of restructuring, very difficult period of time there. But look at where they are today. They actually have fundamentally transformed that country to where they now can pay back their debt and take on the responsibilities that they have with their creditors.
Well, because they had to do a legitimate restructure of their economy. They made the right decisions. What was voted on yesterday in a bipartisan fashion, as you pointed out, Dr. Wittman, does nothing to change the trajectory of Puerto Rico and stop the bad decisions that have been made. So you basically just get a pass on it, and I think that's the problem. Here's my other question. Now that you've set this precedent, every city in America that's not in a good financial situation, every municipality, why couldn't they go to Congress and just ask for the same thing?
Well, they can, John. This doesn't do anything other than, I think, encourage them. And while folks said, listen, states and cities can't pursue Chapter 9, they're correct, but they can come to Congress and said, listen, what you did for Puerto Rico is not Chapter 9. Just do the same thing you did to Puerto Rico for us. Some people will claim, well, we can do this for Puerto Rico under Article 4 of the Constitution, and that we have a responsibility to help manage the territories. I believe that this would be better addressed through Article 3, through the Article 3 court system. That's the way the courts are designed, is for bondholders, creditors to come to terms with the institutions that have borrowed that money. In this instance, the territory of Puerto Rico. That's the way it needs to be done. And yes, I understand that it's difficult, but Puerto Rico has gotten themselves in this very, very difficult position. I think the best interest for them in the long run is to be able to go through that process. I would agree. It is an arduous process. It is difficult. But in the longer term, I think it leaves them in a much better position. While the bill that passed yesterday, you could argue in the short term, gives them a respite, it does not address the long-term issues that Puerto Rico must address in order for them to be successful. So
No,
I don't think what happened yesterday in the long term is to their benefit.
Well, Congressman, this is Colonel Mike. I just want to say something. Are we in the business of bailing out bad government? This is a problem. If we didn't elect these people, whether it's in a territory or in one of the 50 states, why are we bailing out bad government? So it doesn't matter who we vote for then. If you have a bunch of bad government and bad government tanks them, you bail them out. And, John's right. Wall Street doesn't deserve any more bailouts. This country is not any better off since 2008. We're still in a tank. You're probably one of the sharper guys up there, and you know what the situation is. But, I saw Luis Gutierrez on C-SPAN yesterday screaming for Puerto Rico like he lived there. He never screams like that about Chicago. Failed school systems, failed bridges, infrastructure.
Murders at an alarming
the murder capital of America.
It's just unbelievable. And so, nobody's screaming about that, and we're worrying about bailing out Puerto Rico. Okay, Dr. Wittman, I got 5 minutes. Tim Kaine on the National Defense Authorization Act put 2 amendments in for the Senate version that have to do with AUMF. I know we're on the same page on this authorization for military force, basically saying, look, we have to do something to get Congress to get involved in sanctioning, declaring these wars before we send people, continue to send our troops all over the globe. This has been going on forever. Leadership in both parties don't want to do anything. Do you think anything is going to finally come of this?
Well, John, I hope it does. I talked to Senator Kaine yesterday about this. I hope that his amendments will be successful in the Senate. If they are, then at least it gets it to a conference committee for it to be debated. I feel passionately that the Congress needs to have the debate about what we're doing in these engagements and conflicts around the world, because short of that, we see all of what is our constitutional responsibility to the executive branch, and that's not the way things were designed. And those are tough decisions that have to be made, and there has to be direction about what's going on. I'm sure you heard the speaker yesterday unfold the national security policy part of the Republican agenda called A Better Way, and one of those areas is to make sure that we take a strong, assertive effort in addressing our national security interest around the world. And that means going after entities like ISIS, but making sure that it's up to Congress to do the directing on how those efforts take place, and make sure that we have the opportunity to debate that. That, to me, is the key. And then when we have the debate today, John, about what do we need to do to sustain our military, what do we need to do to build military readiness, which, by the way, is at an all-time low and a very, very difficult position for us. The only way you can have the engagement of the American people to say, listen, here's the obligation we have for the brave men and women that serve, and here is what we need to do as a nation to address these things, is to have the debates about what are we doing around the world in these areas of conflict, and what is the engagement going to be, and what obligations do we have behind the men and women that serve. That has to be part of what we do.
Without a doubt. We'll see how these amendments go. Look, you're running for governor. The big debate right now, Terry McAuliffe's edict giving voting rights to 206,000 felons. This has now come under court scrutiny. There's going to be a hearing on it in July. The Republicans going bananas over it. If you were governor right now, is this an order that you would rescind?
I think you would have to, John. Of course, it would be a challenge, because the individuals that have already been had their voting rights restored, I think you'd have to look at those individually on a case-by-case basis, because as it should have been done to begin with, each one of these should be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So what I would want to do is to go exactly back to that and stop those that are being done carte blanche without looking at the specifics and dynamics of each case. You know, previous governors on both sides of the aisle said, hey, you can't do it en masse. You have to do it on a case-by-case basis. And let me tell you, I'm all for making sure that those folks that have paid their debt to society, have paid restitution, have done the proper things to restore themselves to a citizen of good status, have the ability to have their voting rights restored. But you cannot do that en masse, and you can't do it without consideration to the current behavior of those individuals and what they did in being convicted of those felonies. Doing that, I think, is unconstitutional, and it is in direct conflict with the public interest. So I would absolutely go back to doing it on a case-by-case basis.
Hey, Congressman Barry, if you could work as a Republican leader here in the state, the one thing, and I agree with everything you just said, but I have hired felons, and I think there's a place, obviously they're human beings. We got to get them back in the workplace. Let's not be so smug about it. They're not all Democrats. I had 3 people get their rights back last year when I ran for state Senate, and 3 people voted for me as a Republican in the primary. So let's not be just think they're all going to vote Democratic, and that, you know. So let's not give it up. Let's encourage them to consider they're where they are because of the liberal policies and social policies, and some of them know about that. So let's not just give them up.
No,
Okay,
I agree, Barry. We need to give them all due consideration, but again, on a case-by-case basis. And I think doing that, we do those individuals justice and looking at what they've done and making sure that they have that ability to get their voting rights restored, but also make sure, too, we're protecting the public interest and looking at folks that you look at that, you know, on a case-by-case basis, you say probably not for those individuals. And again, previous governors did that, and I agree. Making sure that we give people that opportunity is critical to what government should do and what the executive branch should do with its due diligence. And that practice of due diligence, looking at each case individually, is what we must do.
Okay, Congressman Rob Wittman, we thank you for being with us today. We're out of time. This is the John Fredericks Radio Network.